Everyone. Today we are jumping into some detail around rigor and assessment in project-based learning. And so when we think about rigor and assessment, what we want to make sure is that students are developing the knowledge, skills, and abilities they need to both be successful in the classroom and really being thoughtful about what this means for them in the real world as well. And so we want to make sure that lessons and activities are designed so that students meet competencies. If you have done PBL, you might see at the end of your project, some students learned concept X and others learned concept Y, but really you want all students to learn everything. And so you really have to design your project to have that rigor behind the work, make sure all of the students are meeting all of the objectives that you need them to meet from the standards, and also just in your own mindset of what you want them to get out of the project. And so here are some strategies to do that. Now, this is part of the bigger project-based learning framework that we have. And so this really does merge in with many of the different concepts that are part of project-based learning. And so we're focusing on rigor and assessment, but what you'll see is that may include some inquiry, it may have experiences. Formative critique and revision are an incredible way to get students to hit the level of competency they need in order to be successful. And so as you are on this journey with us, you will see hints of all of this throughout. And if we don't get to something in this session, we might actually see it in another one. So let's jump on in. So the first thing we're going to talk about is connecting your project to standards and competencies, which means you're really setting those clear expectations. You're going to provide rubrics, you're going to provide models so that there's no mystery as to what a student should be doing. If I'm a student in your class, it should be clear what you are expecting of me. So the first thing you want to do is think about, what are the learning objectives I want from my students? What are the knowledge, the skills, and abilities that we might see? And I like to use the term KSAs because we see them a lot in our workforce kind of listings. And so if you look at labor market information, when we look at certain industries, the industries will actually talk about what knowledge, skills, and abilities someone needs to get a job there. So I'm bringing that language down into our talk about project-based learning, because we know it's more than just the standards that our students get out of this, and more than just our own standards. Sometimes we're pulling in standards from other classes, particularly in integrated project-based learning. So I encourage you to really think about how we are looking at our objectives from the bigger picture. So we want to focus these knowledge, skills, technical and essential skills, and the abilities aligning to disciplinary practices. And we'll jump into that in a second. So I want to share with you a document I like to call Planning with Purpose. When we talk about assessment, we might think about that being kind of the end of a lesson, the end of a unit. Assessment often gets this concept of what we might think of as summative assessment, like at the end, did they meet the objectives? But really, assessment is multifaceted, and it has to be founded in planning. So if we start here with this kind of planning with purpose document, you can think about some of the learning outcomes that you want for students. They might be your standards. They might be standards from your Common Core or your NGSS that tie in with your standards. Maybe the standards for career ready practice or your specific CTE standards, whatever it is that you teach. It might be certain skills that you want them to learn. And so we're going to put that maybe right here on the left. And then you can, for each one of these objectives, you want to kind of build out your plan as an instructor. What do you think at the end that you'll see from your students that show you that they learned whatever that objective is or had a competency in that skill? And so what would be the evidence of their learning? And that might be through a rubric, it might be through a model or exemplar that helps them to know what you intend for the evidence of that. Now, then what is the assessment plan? They don't have to demonstrate mastery in a test. We know that presentations, the actual text of a website or a blog, or some kind of, maybe they're creating a book, whatever that summative piece is that's going to show that learning. This is where you can say, where at the end are they going to show that they demonstrated mastery? But you have to take it back a step. How will they learn it? A lot of people kind of think, oh, I'm doing a project-based learning for the next 6 weeks. All right, kids, go for it. And I'm going to sit here with my feet up and watch my kids work on their projects. Well, we all know that's not how this goes. And so what you want to do is throughout the week and throughout that project, engage students in learning activities. So when I was in the classroom, I taught chemistry. And so we might have all done the same lab together. And then they might have had time to work on, building their calorimeter or whatever kind of project they had going at the same time. And then they can utilize that in the labs that they are doing. So there might be some kind of activity that we all do together to understand, like, what's the point of this calorimeter? And it's really to measure how much energy is released in a reaction, right? But what does that mean? I need to contain the heat. It means that I need to, I have to learn that some reactions emit heat and some absorb heat, right? So we have to have these learning activities that maybe all students engage in. And then they can take that information and apply it to their project, like creating their calorimeter. Now I know that heat can be absorbed or emitted in a reaction. How do I capture that? Well, I want to create a really insulated device. And so they can take that learning and apply it as part of their project. Now, formative assessment, this is pretty much just a way for you to know they're on track to hit that learning objective. And so formative assessment, it could be like a ticket out the door or like a little quiz, but a lot of times it could just be you checking in with them. In project-based learning, sometimes it's nice to check in with one team member every week or get some kind of update from your team on their progress. You could even work with them and go through a rubric. Sometimes when I build out rubrics, I'll have a second column that's like for checking along the way, where you can kind of mark like where they are on this date. And so that's a way to formatively assess, like, are they meeting the benchmarks I need them to meet in week 1 that would lead me to believe they can hit that final project by week 6. And so really thinking about how you get evidence and how are you going to interpret that evidence along the way. Finally, think about all your students. You have students who have IEPs or 504 plans. You may have students who have different languages that are their strength. Are there scaffolding or strategy you can put in place to ensure that this particular learning outcome can be met by all learners? Now, this whole chat we just had is really what good instruction is, no matter where you're at. But when it comes to project-based learning, you are trusting students to drive their learning to a point where you have to be explicit, and pre-planning to this level will make your life so much easier once you implement the project. So I encourage you to think about this. I know in some of the first projects I ever did, I got to the end and I was like, this group met these objectives and this group met those objectives, but neither one knows the other's objectives. And so that was my fault as the instructor on not making sure that all of my students are hitting all of our core objectives. And then whatever their separate projects are about, clearly they're all going to become experts in something a little bit different, but get that core learning, make sure all students hit it. And this document might help you. It's all linked in the PowerPoint that you have access to. So what we recommend is that you use rubrics to set a lot of these expectations for students. Descriptive rubrics that are not necessarily just around numbers, all right? So each criteria should be a key attribute of what's going to be assessed. A rubric's not a checklist, and so you want quality, not quantity. A good example is, if you want works cited, if you say must include 3 references from information. How many references do you think you'll get? I would guess not any more than 3 for most projects. But if instead you really teach kids what a quality reference is, and your rubric says all information in the project comes from a source that's part of your bibliography or your works cited. Well, now you can go through and make sure that students understand that, and they're going to have a much larger amount of sources because you really teach them that every time you use a resource, you just drop it in that works cited, right? And so that's a kind of a tip on not just having a checklist, but really saying like, what does each thing in that checklist need to do in order to have the quality you want? You want to make sure you're using language that is student friendly. And really a rubric should function in a lot of ways. Like a rubric is in some ways like, here is what you're going to do. And they should be able to take that rubric at many steps in the process and evaluate themselves to see where they need to grow further. So give students time to use that rubric, maybe even every week. And so they can start seeing where their gaps are and where they might want to put their energy. And so again, it's more than just directions in a box, but really helping to drive quality of project. And that's really what rigor is, right? The quality of learning, the depth of learning. And so a rubric that includes that is best. All right, so when we talk about that formative assessment I kind of talked about a moment ago, I want you to think about this. At any step in your project, you should be able to say to a student, and they should know the answer to this. So if I say to the student, where are you going? Like, where at the end of this project, what are you trying to create? But then today, where are you now? Like, what is your status? How have you grown? What things have you hit? And where to next? So what's left to do? So formative assessment is something that can happen by the student or by the teacher. So I can check in with my students and know where they are, or I can also empower my students to look at their work, to reflect, and to know what they need to do in order to continue the work that they're doing. And so I want you to think about this, and I'm hopeful that you've already looked at some 1-point rubrics if you're going through this system. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are, and this may be something you have to come back to once you've looked at the rubrics for these, but 1-point rubrics are a really powerful way to help with growth. And so what you might do is create 1-point rubrics for student project work, but turn them into like multi-point scoreable rubrics for grading. So you can take the same rubric and kind of turn it into something that you can use at the end for summative grading. So when we develop competencies through learning activities and project work, we're going to really think about like, what is it that we want our students to learn? And so one thing I really like to do is create a learning playlist. And so this gives students opportunities to build their competency through a variety of means. So just think about, how does learning work if you're not in school, right? I want to learn about something new. I'm a foodie, so maybe I want to come up with a new meal or try something molecular gastronomy. And so I'm going to look at videos. I might look at infographics. I have this cool book that like visualizes what foods go with other foods, right? I love that kind of thing. I might read articles or blogs or listen to podcasts. I might do hands-on activities. Like, I kid you not, in my kitchen, this can't be a surprise to everyone, I have a book of kitchen experiments, and it's a little like notebook that I take notes on when I'm trying something new so that I can come back to it and iterate on my processes. I might go on field trips, like go try something in a restaurant I want, right? So as a learner in my own life, I don't usually go to a lecture to learn. So in order for your students to build competencies, what you can do is help them learn by curating playlists that include things that everyone's going to do. Maybe you have a guest speaker come in, everyone's going to hear, but it could include things like articles or blogs or podcasts. And you say to the kids, hey, everybody needs to read 2 out of this list or listen to 2 out of this list. So really think about what could your learning playlist be to really engage students in learning in ways that we choose to learn as adults all the time. Also, get those expectations onto a timeline whenever you can, right? When you think about the overarching work that you're going to do, you want to kick off the project with something that drives engagement. And then as you go through your project, let's say it's a 6-week project, you've got to do something exciting every week, right? So you kick off the project where maybe we're going to have an industry speaker, or we're going to watch a video or movie or do some kind of inquiry activity that gets kids, that gets our students, our learners really excited about the topic and connects it to them, right? We want our students to have ownership in their learning. Then maybe the next week we plan something else. The third week we plan another piece. A great thing to do at about the halfway mark is even bring in some industry experts and let each team have a consultancy with them. So each team might sign up for 10 minutes with an industry expert so that they can get feedback on their project where it is. A lot of times we bring in industry at the very end, and all the feedback goes into that round bin on the way out the door because the students are done with their work. We want to change what it means to be done with something. And so adding these fun, exciting activities throughout helps students in that iterative process of making sure that they meet those competencies and that they get feedback and expert advice on their way to their product, not just once their product is complete. So this is a really great question. And if we were all together, we might pair and share this. But I think as you look at some of the things we've talked about and think about your own practice, think about what is rigor? How do we get quality work from our students? How do we get quality learning? How do we hit the kind of more applied knowledge where it's not just the opportunity for students to spit out an answer, but to take information and use it, right? And so we want to really get to that point where we can trust our students to hit a certain depth of their work. So we want to think about content. Students are engaging in content at or above their current grade level. A lot of times we'll say, oh yeah, we're definitely doing math. This is a STEAM activity, but that math might be adding or subtracting, which is not grade level standards. It's tough definitely to get grade level math into other non-math classes in high school. But when we think about content, we want them to really meet or exceed current grade level. We also want them to have that process. One of the things we can do is have things like a process portfolio or process reflections so that as they go through their project, the final product might be amazing, but the process and being able to articulate what happened to get them to the final product is the magic of where learning happens and where rigor really is found. And so having that documentation as part of what you're even going to grade, as part of what they might display at the end, and maybe even as part of a portfolio is a great way to introduce and encourage rigor in the work. And then also thinking about what skills they are going to come out of the project with. Things like practice and using those skills, applying their skills, allow students to grow and meet competency, which really means that they can perform that skill as needed in the right way. And so as we think about rigor, we want to think about not just the information, but how they are using that information and how they are acquiring those skills. Now, beyond the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are kind of your objective for your whole class, students can pull in a lot of choice. And so as you're thinking about assessment, I want you to really look at if it's not one of the things that you need them to learn, you have to let go of control. So you can have all of your students kind of creating the same kind of product with the same focus or topic, but that gets really boring both as a teacher and as a student. But if you have students creating the same product, let's say you're a multimedia class, they're all going to create a video, but they can pick things they're passionate about as the focus or topic because your standards are multimedia. If you are doing something where maybe it's social science and you have a specific topic, you want to talk about a certain era, you're talking about the 1920s and so maybe everyone is having that focus, but then does it matter what kind of product they make? Maybe they make a video, maybe they create a presentation, maybe they're creating a website, maybe they're doing a reenactment. So they could all have different products that are all around the same topic. And then finally, sometimes you might have different products that combine into a larger group product. I feel like sometimes you see this in like the creation of a book or magazine, right? Every student is going to create something that goes into that, but maybe this student makes a poem and this one creates an infographic and this one over here does an article And so you get a variety of different products, but they all combine into this compendium, this book, this magazine, something that represents your class as a whole. And so when you are doing this, though, let's say you are an English teacher and one of the competencies that you need all students to have is public speaking. Well, then it does make sense for every group to need to do some kind of presentation. But if you are not evaluating public speaking as one of your objectives, you can let that go and give students a variety of options as to how they might display their learning. So we have to remember that assessment is more than a test. This is where we are looking for knowing what the knowledge, skills, and abilities that students have with a focus on process, growth, and development. You can assess a product, you can assess a portfolio, a demonstration, a presentation, an exhibition. There are a lot of different kinds of assessments that we see. This is just the process of gathering evidence of student learning to inform educational decisions. Stop and think about that. That is assessment stripped down to its purest way. An assessment can go into the grade book, but it can also kind of go into feedback, right? So formative is when I'm giving it as feedback. Summative tends to be there at the end, but it can be anything a student will make, say, do, write, or create to demonstrate understanding of the intended learning. So think about that intended learning and then let your students take control over some of the components so that they can create things that they're passionate about. Remember, assessment is this bridge between teaching and learning. We might have given our students the information, but if they aren't able to use it, then they haven't learned it. And so through assessment, we can find out whether what has happened in the classroom has produced the learning we intended. An assessment guru, Dylan William, shares that quote with us. So your next steps are to step back and look at some of the rubrics that we've created. And so there's a specific rubric around rigor and assessment. And this is not a student rubric. This is a rubric that you can use to grow your project. So I want you to think about your project, and I want you to think, is the project designed to ensure all students are competent and confident in identified KSAs based on core standards and expectations? So this is an example of a 1-point rubric. On the left, you can say, absolutely, I've already identified the knowledge, skills, and abilities. I really feel like my students know those, but maybe ideas for powering up the project. Ooh, the word competent and confident, those are interesting words. I don't know that my students are really confident in this. So maybe I want to boost up their confidence by incorporating more opportunities for them to speak to their project throughout so that at the end, they're really confident about the things that they are learning, right? So as you go through the criteria and goals, you can articulate where your project is awesome, as well as where you might power it up. Thank you so much for joining me for this little mini lesson on rigor and assessment and project-based learning. I'm Jewel Alderson-Clark with the San Diego County Office of Education, and I hope to see you again in some of our future videos or classes. Thank you. And here are some additional resources that you should be able to peruse at your leisure as part of this document. Thank you.